Hello, I'm going to bring a message which I really thought about in advance and prayed for God's help. I was looking to find a relevant passage from the Bible and a theme to help all of us in this very unique situation of lockdown. And for my daily walk, I was asking God to guide me about this message. And first of all, I got the word captivity. I don't know whether you feel that that's a relevant word for you. Certainly, personally, I do feel in captivity with this mandate for us to remain at home most of the time. And I was thinking actually about the time that I was in hospital, and I was actually virtually held to my hospital bed by a monitor that would start bleeping very loudly if I disconnected it. So I was chained to the bed. But I have to say that emotionally, at least, I feel more in captivity now than I ever did with that experience in the hospital. And I would say that when I was in the hospital, at least I could have visitors twice a day, whereas at the moment, no visitors allowed. So I certainly feel in captivity, and you may do too. So I got that word captivity, and I felt that that was relevant. And I needed to find a Bible passage, and I thought, well, there are so many possible Bible passages to choose from, so I need more than just the word captivity. So I carried on praying. And then I got a second word, which was the word crisis. And again, a very relevant word, because there is a crisis in this country, and there is a crisis throughout the whole world as we try to cope with this global pandemic. And then when I thought about captivity and crisis, I started to think about the second chapter of Daniel. I know the book of Daniel very well. I knew the story. And I knew that both words would be relevant to that particular story. And then it took me quite a long time when I was still talking to God, because I felt I needed something else. And finally, the word courage came. The word courage came because Daniel 2 is all about the hero Daniel and his three friends who needed courage in a very difficult situation. And for sure, we need courage at this time. So before I start to talk about the particular passage, it's quite a long passage, but Linda here is now going to read the whole of the chapter to you. So thank you, Linda.
In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled and he could not sleep. So the king summoned the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, "I have had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means." Then the astrologers answered the king, "May the king live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it." The king replied to the astrologers, "This is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me." Once more they replied, "Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will interpret it." Then the king answered, "I am certain that you are trying to gain time, because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there is only one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then, tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me." The astrologers answered the king, "There is no one on earth who can do what the king asks. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among humans." This made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree was issued to put the wise men to death. And men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends, to put them to death. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. He asked the king's officer, "Why did the king issue such a harsh decree?" Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went into the king and asked for time, so that he might interpret the dream for him. Then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven and said, "Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we asked of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king." Then Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to execute the wise men of Babylon, and said to him, "Do not execute the wise men of Babylon. Take me to the king, and I will interpret this dream for him." Arioch took Daniel to the king at once and said, "I have found a man among the exiles from Judah who can tell the king what his dream means." The king asked Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, "Are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it?" Daniel replied, "No wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come. Your dream and the visions that passed through your mind as you were lying in bed are these. As your majesty was lying there, your mind turned to things to come, and the revealer of mysteries showed you what is going to happen. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have greater wisdom than anyone else, but so that your majesty may know the interpretation and that you may understand what went through your mind." Your majesty looked, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all broken to pieces and became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream, and now we will interpret it to the king. Your Majesty, you are the King of Kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed all mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds in the sky. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are that head of gold. After you, another kingdom will arise, inferior to yours. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. Just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, as you saw iron mixed with clay. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united any more than iron mixes with clay. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of a mountain, but not by human hands. A rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honor and ordered that an offering and incense be presented to him. The king said to Daniel, "Surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you were able to reveal this mystery." Then the king placed Daniel in a high position and lavished many gifts on him. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed him in charge of all its wise men. Moreover, at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego administrators over the province of Babylon, while Daniel himself remained at the royal court.
Thank you, Linda, very much. A very interesting story. Let's go back to our three words. And first of all, I want to talk about the idea of captivity. Now, we consider the people of God in captivity. Nebuchadnezzar, we know historically, successfully attacked Jerusalem in the year 605 before Christ. And as a result of his attack, the Jews, many of them, were exiled to Babylon in various stages. Now, Daniel was one of a number of clever, young, male aristocrats, and he was amongst the first group taken to Babylon, and he and his three friends were almost sent to university. 3 years intellectual stimulation, study of science, astronomy. The idea was to assimilate them into Babylonian culture. So these young Jewish aristocrats were deported to learn a new language and to forget their Jewish roots. Now, I know at least one person listening today, watching today, loves Star Trek. That's Martin, and there may be others familiar with Star Trek, those programs in the past. So if I was to say, we are the Borg, you will be assimilated, resistance is futile. Some of you would know exactly what I'm talking about. And it's a little bit like that for Daniel in captivity. He did not want to be assimilated, and actually he didn't believe the lie that resistance would be futile. He believed that resistance would not be futile. So he was in captivity, as were God's people as a whole, deported to Babylon in exile. Then we think about crisis. The fact that Daniel, in the crisis, kept his head. There was a crisis that arose specifically here in Daniel chapter 2, an impossible situation. Let me tell you a story about a teacher in a school who wrote two numbers on a blackboard. The two numbers were 4 and 2. And the teacher said to the class, "What's the solution?" And one student called out 6, and another one called out 2, and several shouted 8. Well, the teacher shook his head. What you all failed to ask is, what is the question? What is the question? Until the children knew what the question was, they couldn't give the answer, or the problem with what what Nebuchadnezzar rather was asking, is that he wanted an interpretation to his dream, but he couldn't remember the dream. So what chance did anyone have of interpreting a dream without even knowing what the dream was in the first place? But what Daniel did was somehow, in this impossible situation, in this crisis, he kept his head. He didn't panic. We read that the decree was issued to put the wise men to death because they couldn't interpret a dream that they didn't even know what the dream was. Men were sent to look for Daniel and his 3 friends also to put them to death. But we read that Daniel spoke to the commander of the king's guard with wisdom and tact. He didn't panic. Panic is a sign of desperation and hopelessness. We know that a knee-jerk reaction just makes things worse, although we have to admit that sometimes in a crisis, our reaction is very much in the heat of the moment, but it wasn't the case for Daniel. Daniel kept his head, he didn't panic, he kept calm. We read that he asked the king's officer, why did the king issue such a harsh decree? That Arioch explained the matter to Daniel. Well, apparently there used to be something called Navy law. Quoting from Rudyard Kipling to start off with, if you can keep your head when all about you others are losing theirs, and then it veers away from Rudyard Kipling because it carries on. If you keep your head when all about you others are losing theirs, maybe you just don't understand the situation. So there's a little bit of humor there in this law within the Royal Navy. Well, Daniel certainly could keep his head when others were losing theirs, and he certainly did understand the situation. He was taking the crisis seriously, and yet somehow he was able to stay composed. He kept his head, he didn't panic, he kept calm in this situation, and also we have to give him credit because he's able to think quickly. We read that at this, Daniel went into the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. Daniel was able to think quickly. Years ago, when Apollo 12 took off, the spacecraft was hit by lightning, and the entire console apparently began to glow with lights, orange lights, red lights, and there was a temptation in that situation for the astronauts to do something, but they kept calm and they thought quickly. And one of them said, is this thing still flying in the right direction? And it seemed that yes, it was. It was headed actually for the moon. And so they kept calm. They didn't panic. They thought quickly. They were composed. They allowed the lights to continue to glow. And what they did was they addressed individual problems one by one, and very slowly, the different orange and red lights were put out one by one. So something to think about maybe in any situation of pressure would be, if your thing is still flying, then think first and then act. Don't panic. Don't overreact. Avoid a knee-jerk reaction. So in the crisis, Daniel was able to keep his head. And what he also did was he got others to pray. We read that Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He got others praying. And I think one function of the church, at the moment we are the church to a large extent separated, we're dispersed, but even so we can still make contact with one another on the phone, by email, and other ways. And even in this situation, one function of the church should be for individuals to share their troubles with others. That's how the church should function. That when we bottle things up, it rarely helps. We need to get others praying. If we're struggling, get somebody else praying for you. It makes all the difference. That's what Daniel does. He gets his 3 friends to pray. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. So, no doubt that the 3 friends did pray. How did they pray? Did they ask God to show the dream and the meaning to Daniel? Is that how they prayed? Did they pray for Nebuchadnezzar to be more reasonable? Did they pray that they would honor God in the way that they died? Well, I don't think we really know for sure, but we do get a clue in the very next chapter, because we're told that in another crisis situation, these same three friends also tell us what their attitude would be and what they would expect from God. It's all about being thrown into the blazing furnace. And what they say in chapter 3 is the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he can deliver us from your majesty's hand. Again, talking to Nebuchadnezzar. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up. So what they're saying in verses 17 and 18 of Daniel 3 is that they're not going to compromise their faith in the way that they were being asked to by the king, even though they were being threatened with execution, that they're going to trust their God. And their attitude is to hope for the best, but to prepare for the worst. So we get an inkling as to how these three friends might have prayed in Daniel chapter 2, to hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. And sometimes we have to be, well, we always have to be realistic, that God is able to deliver us from very difficult circumstances, but sometimes the grown-up thing to do is to hope for the best, but to prepare for the worst. That's the principle shown by these three friends here in Daniel chapter 2. What Daniel does is he gets others praying. He can't be confident as to how God will answer, but this is a no-lose situation to get others praying. And we need to do that too. We need to do that while we're in lockdown. We need to pray, and if you're struggling in a particular way, then don't be embarrassed about it. Why not share with someone that you trust, someone who understands you, someone who will pray with you, for you, who will not judge you, but will pray for you, that God would help you as you're struggling. So in the crisis, Daniel kept his head. He got others praying. That's the second of our words. We thought of captivity, we thought of crisis. And then we go on to our third word, which is the word courage. The word courage. Because what we see in Daniel chapter 2 is that Daniel takes his time. He takes his time. He needs God to reveal the dream to him, and that's exactly what God does. But he doesn't get overexcited. He gives thanks to God, first of all, when God gives him the dream, and also, amazingly, the interpretation of the dream, because we read that the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision, and we know that Daniel got the interpretation as well. But what does Daniel do? He doesn't go rushing out to talk to the king. First of all, he remembers to pray and to give thanks to God. We read that he praised the God of heaven. He said, "Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his." And so in the next few verses, Daniel continues in his prayer, and we get a summary of his prayer. So Daniel shows total confidence in this revelation that has come to him from God about the dream and about the meaning. He has total confidence in the outcome of all of this, the way that he praises God and worships God. It's clear that Daniel believes that God is going to deliver him from this situation, and his three friends too. He shows a lot of courage. He takes his time. He gives credit to God as well. As he eventually comes before the king, he says, "No man can explain the mystery, but there is a God who can." No man can explain the mystery, but there is a God who can. He wants to give credit to God, and that's what he does. In my previous church as a minister, I was up in Lancashire, in a place that always makes people smile when they hear the name. The place was called Oswald Twistle. And Linda and I had an amazing adventure the 10 years that we were in Oswald Twistle. The previous minister had given us a mandate to go there to finish what he had started, because the church had a clear vision from God to move from a dilapidated building in a back street to a brand new building in the middle of town. It was an audacious plan. And now looking back, I would give all the credit to God for what happened. One of the most exciting times for me in ministry. We thank God for the people there in that church, very humble, working class Lancashire people who bought in to the vision that God gave me. It was a courageous strategy. What we decided to do was to sell our old building first when we were miles short in terms of having sufficient funds for putting up a brand new building in the middle of town. But we felt that what God was saying, do we trust him or not? Are we prepared to not have a building at all, to sell the building that we had? And we were. And I remember preaching a sermon about Abraham, who was called to move without actually knowing where he was going to go. And there was 100% reaction. Every single person in that church, we really saw a move of God. It was one of the most amazing sermons I've ever preached, because I preached it with great trepidation, thinking that people would call me crazy. But in actual fact, every single person in the church said, we have heard from God today. We're going to do this. We're going to put our building up for sale. We're going to show that courage because we believe that we have heard from God. We have no idea where we're going. And what happened, we were actually 3 years in temporary accommodation, during which we saw tremendous growth. Lots of people joined a church that was going somewhere. We didn't have room to get everybody in that temporary building. It was a nice problem to have. And eventually, the glorious day came when we moved into that brand new building. One of the most exciting moments for me in 38 years of ministry, that first day in September when we moved into this lovely new building, and where God brought lots of new people into that church. But we give credit and glory to God, because what God did through that process was he gave very ordinary people the faith to believe in a miracle, and the miracle happened. So we need courage as God's people. We need courage in all kinds of situations. And Daniel was someone who displayed courage, as did the three friends. We see that Daniel took his time, he gave credit to God, and he showed no fear. He went before the king, and he was able to reveal the dream, and then he gave the interpretation. If it had been you or I, we might have hedged our bets a little bit and not given all of the interpretation, because who knows how Nebuchadnezzar would react to being told that this statue that he dreamt about actually represented not only his own kingdom, but actually other kingdoms. It represented the Babylonian kingdom, the Persian kingdom, the Greek kingdom, the Roman kingdom, and actually another kingdom as well. That all these kingdoms would be temporary, but they would lead to God's messianic kingdom. Glorious kingdom, a kingdom that lasts forever, a kingdom ruled by King Jesus. And Daniel had the courage to give the whole story to the king, not knowing for sure how the king would react to the fact that his kingdom would not last for that long. He shows no fear. And he declares to King Nebuchadnezzar that true power behind all earthly kingdoms, which God allows to flourish, that true power belongs to one alone, and that is to the God of the universe, the God who has made the heavens and the earth. And that God allows any kingdom only to continue for a period of time. And Nebuchadnezzar doesn't react negatively to that. He actually reacts very humbly, because he recognizes that Daniel's God is the true God, the God of gods, the Lord of lords, the Lord of kings. And Daniel's courage pays off. And so this morning, as I come to a conclusion, we've thought about these three words: captivity, crisis, and courage. And boy, do some of us need to show courage in this situation. Some of us feel that we're in captivity. We all acknowledge that this is a crisis that we've never encountered before in our lives and never likely to encounter again. So these are useful and helpful and appropriate words, a summary of our situation: captivity, crisis, but also courage. And I want to conclude with that, to encourage you to show no fear. You say, how is that possible? Perhaps you say, every night I go to bed with fear. Every night I wake up with fear. Well, let me tell you that we have a God who is with us, who knows the end from the beginning. And he calls us to show courage, because he wants to bring us through these testing times. So will you put your confidence in him this morning? Give him confidence to give you the courage you need in these coming weeks and months. Thank you so much for listening.